Steelhead, or lake-run rainbows, are found throughout the Great Lakes region of the U.S. and Canada. It's a chance to catch a very large rainbow trout on the fly. Yeah, sometimes the rivers are crowded, and many of these fish are hatchery raised. But access to these great fisheries is available to anglers in populated areas, with most rivers open to the public. And with the right timing, the opportunity to cast a fly over vast numbers of large fish.
Oh yeah, nice fish! That fish has already refused that fly. You're gonna have to try just a slightly different pattern.
The roll cast pickup is a great cast to use in a lot of fishing situations.
This is a beautiful wild trout from a small stream, just a gorgeous little fish.
I say hit that bank. Let's go to that grass bed.
The Orvis Guide to Fly Fishing is supported by Orvis Fly Fishing, Adipose Boat Works, Global Rescue, Trout Unlimited, Oscar Blues Brewery.
I grew up on the shores of Lake Ontario, and when I was a kid, we didn't know anything about steelhead. We had heard rumors that there were rainbow trout that came in from the lake and came up the streams to spawn, but the trouble was the season was closed September 30th when the steelhead come in rivers, and open April 1st after a lot of them drop back into the lake.
Steelhead are found in hundreds of tributaries to the Great Lakes, from huge rivers to tiny creeks. Some of them even run through major urban centers. There have been small runs of steelhead in Great Lakes tributaries since rainbow trout were introduced from the west coast of North America just before the turn of the 20th century. But populations really expanded in the 1970s with massive stockings in the Great Lakes at the same time that the Clean Water Act began to improve water quality in the lakes and their tributaries.
There's a really exciting fishery that happens every spring and fall in nearly every tributary stream to the Great Lakes. They're big rainbow trout that grow fat in the lakes and then come up these streams to spawn. Now, some people call them steelhead, and some people say, no, they're not true steelhead, because true steelhead are a West Coast fish that comes in from the Pacific Ocean, comes up rivers to spawn. We're not gonna get into that argument here. I don't care what you call them. We're gonna have some fun, we're gonna catch some steelhead, and we're gonna learn how to do it. Oh, yeah! All right, a jump. So, Jeff was fishing down there in a little bit slower water, and I always like to fish a little bit more towards the head. I think the fish are easier to catch. When they're in the faster water, they're easier to fool. They have to grab it quicker. And this fish, it didn't take him long to grab that white zonker. Yeah, fairly, that's a heavy fish. Steelhead fishing's all about timing. You know, these fish come out of the lake, they're coming up here to spawn. They can literally move 10 miles a day. So it's all about getting to the river when the fish are in, and you can never predict it. The river could be full of fish today, and it could have been empty last week, or could be almost empty next week. So it's all about timing, and you just have to go and hope the fish are in the river. You know, when you're fishing for migratory fish like steelhead, where conditions are so important, you've got two options. You either are flexible, you make your phone calls, you check the internet, and you go when conditions are perfect. Or you take what the river offers you. And that's what we have here. We had really high water. It's dropping now. It's almost fishable. It's dirty, but we're here. We're gonna fish. We're gonna have fun, and we're gonna make the best of it. So we're here on a smaller steelhead stream, a tributary of a larger river. And I'm here with Jeff Blood, who grew up in this area and knows this fishery intimately. And I want to talk a little bit about how you read the water, because where you put your fly is the most important thing, right?
Absolutely, Tom.
I mean, you're fishing an indicator rig. I'm fishing tight line, but we're both trying to do the same thing, and we need to fish the same water.
No, exactly. And it's you're trying to get over the fish and then down into the fish. So what you're looking for as you're coming up the stream is the sweet spot of where they want to be in the current, or as they're migrating, they really come up and stop and rest.
Yeah.
And then they move on up until they find gravel, and then they'll move on to the gravel when the temperature comes up and the water conditions are correct.
So before we look at the water, what do they want? What is steelhead? Where do they want to be in a river?
Well, you know, the basics of almost any animal is food, love, and shelter.
Yeah.
So they're coming here for the love.
Right.
They're not ready for the love yet, but they're preparing for it. And then they want food and shelter. Because they're coming from a very large body of water, the Great Lakes in this case, where they feel safe most of the time. They're coming into a small system and they're big fish. They're mostly looking for shelter first, and then they're looking for food. And so, you know, this particular section of the river right here where we're standing, there's a long riffle going up through, and down below us there's a long riffle. So they've come up through the long riffle. This is a natural stopping point for them.
For them to rest a little bit.
To rest a little bit. If you look at this water, Tom, it's got, you know, nice current coming in, but it's not too heavy.
Right.
So they're not expending a lot of energy to stay here. They drop down in, there's a ledge over there, so they like structure. They like rocks, like is in the water right here. And, you know, it's just a soft drift coming down through. Perfect place to hold them. And you want to spend a little more time on this type of a pool than you might on a, you know, another smaller, lesser pool as you go up the stream.
Because it's a bigger, for this river, this small stream, it's a pretty good sized pool.
It's a pretty good sized pool.
And they want to be in the current, right? They don't want to be off in the real slack water. They like to have some current.
Most of the time, the fish, you'll find always an outlier, you know, that'll go over and lay against the bank slow, but the majority of the fish want to be in the current. This has got a little swirl to it. So sometimes they'll be laying, you know, the opposite direction of what the stream is flowing, because the current's swirling around through. So, you know, you want to take that into consideration as you're making your drift, and sometimes let it come back on you. And you do it either with an indicator or as you're doing with a straight line technique. And straight line technique right here is a really good spot, because you can get right over them.
Right, yeah, small.
Pendulum swing right down over the top. Yeah.
All right.
There we go. I think it's a steelhead. Yeah, we got a nice steelhead here. So he was laying right in the soft seam right there. And there's, you know, some good structure and a ledge right down there. Just a perfect place for him to be. And it's not a particularly huge fish, but it's a nice fish. So I caught him on a white zonker, and I find that fly to be particularly effective, especially on the Lake Erie tribs. And what I believe it's imitating is an emerald shiner, and particularly a dead emerald shiner, which the reason why it works well is, you know, there's natural mortality every day out in the lake, and the fish feed on the dead ones. A lot of people don't know that, but they do. So this looks like a nice little male. You can see that white zonker in his mouth. You can see my egg pattern above the fish. So I fish a tandem rig. Just, you know, gives you twice the chance of catching the fish. And I'm gonna bring them over here and see if we can land them. And whoop, and he's off.
Structure and protection for steelhead does not just mean rocks or logs. They can feel just as safe in deep water or in riffled water because the broken surface hides them. But wherever you fish for them, remember that they won't be far from that main current.
Oh no! Yeehaw! Yeah, yeah, you know that. It just looks so good over there. It's overhung. It's got oh, I didn't see that stick. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Oh, he's got me wrapped around it. Oh, he's free, but yeah, he's free. Thank you. I didn't see that. Okay. Yeah. As I was saying, I was over there against the bank, and there's a nice overhang there. There's a stick hanging over there, and the current looked just right. And you know, these steelhead do like to have some protection, as Jeff was saying. So that's a pretty fish, huh? Pretty bright. Ate the white zonker again. Would be a wild fish, I don't know. Hard to tell, but pretty fish anyways. Whoop. Bye-bye, buddy. Ah, woohoo! So I came up on this fast water here, and I noticed the soft water on the inside where that whirlpool goes around, and I thought maybe just ahead of that swirling whirlpool where that big foam thing is, where those bubbles are coming down there, is a nice soft edge. It's relatively deep in there, and sure enough, second cast there was a fish in there. And now we got to get this fish back. He's way on the other side. While I was doing all that talking, the fish got away from me. So I think not really a good place to land him in here. I'd like to be below him. So, you know, pulling a fish upstream is always tough. The hook's gonna pull out. So I think what I'm gonna do is try to run downstream and get below him so I can get him into a little bit slower water too. So I'm gonna get in the water here and try to get below him and get in a little bit better landing spot. So now we've got this nice shallow water, softer water. We can get him in easier. I'm gonna try to get below him again. Nice fish. Oh, and he ate the egg. This fish ate a fly that was given to me by an angler who's been doing well with it. It's a big yellow yarn egg fly. And I gotta go over and thank him for that. Well, there he is. Pretty bright steelhead. Gave us a good fight. Oh, look at that, he's got both flies in his mouth. What a pig. Give him a drink. Whoa. When you're dead drift steelheading, so much of it is about the drift. It's critical that you get that fly down near the bottom and dead drift without drag. And sometimes just moving a few feet up or downstream can change the way your fly drifts. And the side of the river you're on can also be important. I've been trying to fish this pocket on the far bank, and Jeff's been over on the other side catching steelhead. I'm stubborn. I'm trying to do it from this bank, but I'm casting over faster water and I'm just not getting the drift right. So it's just all about positioning. Sometimes just a few feet can make a difference.
As with most types of fly fishing, but especially when fishing two flies, as we are here, there's always a chance of getting hooked. Here's a quick way to remove a hook on the river, as long as it's not in the eye or in really soft tissue. Those instances are better dealt with by a trip to the doctor.
So we've got a little issue here, and Mark, when he was tying on a fly, got a fly stuck in his thumb. So we're going to show you how to pull out a barbed fly. Of course, barbless is always better, but if you don't have barbless, then you got to do this trick. So you take a heavy piece of monofilament. This is 1X, and you run it around the bend of the hook. There. I'm gonna pull on 3. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Wow, didn't even hurt.
There are 2 basic methods for catching Great Lakes steelhead: dead drifting and swinging the fly. Although swinging the fly is thought by most to be more fun and closer to the essence of fly fishing, dead drifting a fly is often the most effective and is the best way to start if you just want to catch a steelhead on the fly. There are many different ways to get a dead drift, which is bringing your fly to the fish instead of a fish chasing the fly. Some steelhead are more aggressive than others, but the majority of the fish are down in their lies picking things from the current, just as smaller trout do. And as in trout fishing, any drag on the fly may turn these fish off, so your fly has to tumble in the current like natural food. And also like trout fishing, we can do this either by suspending flies from an indicator or by fishing them on a tight line with a direct line from the rod tip to the flies. On a recent steelhead trip, Mark Melnick and I both dead drifted a combination of egg flies and white zonker patterns. Although we used exactly the same flies, we used different techniques to get them down to the fish. And we caught about an equal number of fish when we were able to get good drifts. Here Mark and I explain the difference in our techniques.
As you can see, Tom is using a very different technique for targeting these steelhead than I am. He's tight lining with a sighter, which means that he's in direct contact with his fly and the weight that he has to get his fly down to the bottom. I'm using an indicator, which is not unlike a bobber, which shows what's going on beneath the surface for me, but I don't directly feel what Tom feels. So it's 2 very different ways of presenting eggs and nymphs, and they're both very effective in their own right. You know what? To each his own. Tom loves the sensitivity of being able to feel those fish take or to feel the bottom, and I like the action of seeing the bobber go down, the indicator go down, and setting the hook on these fantastic Great Lakes steelhead.
So what I'm doing is called tight lining or high sticking. And what I'm doing is I'm using a very thin line, and it's all leader. I really only have the leader outside of the tip of my rod. So you plunk the flies down, whether it's weighted flies or a split shot, they go right to the bottom. That thin line that they're connected to doesn't have any resistance, and it cuts through the current, gets right to the bottom. Then you tighten up a little bit and just try to lead those flies down through the pockets. It's dead drift, and you got just a little bit of tension on it so that you can feel every bump on the bottom and maybe a little bit more solid pull that might be a fish. Whoop. Bye-bye, buddy. Yeah, I just re-rigged and maybe something about the way I put the weight on there. I lengthened my tippet a little bit. It could have been a lot of things. With this high sticking, you want to have a lot of tippet below that sighter. And I didn't have as much tippet on before, and that allows me to get that, the tippet is going to sink better than anything because it's thinner. So the more tippet you have on there, the quicker your fly is going to get down with less weight.
Rigging for tightline steelhead is very straightforward. You tie about a 2-foot section of colored cider material to the end of a 9-foot 0x leader, add a swivel to the end of the cider, and tie a fluorocarbon tippet to the swivel. Your tippet might be anywhere from 2 feet to 5 feet, depending on the depth. You can fish a single fly on the end of this, or tandem flies where legal. Split shot can be placed above the flies or between them to get added depth. There are many ways to set up an indicator rig, but here, Jeff Blood details exactly how he sets up his indicator rig.
Show us how you rig an indicator for steelhead, indicator rig, and then show how to adjust it, because I know, myself included, I get lazy, and everybody gets lazy, and you don't adjust your indicator height or your weight, and then you're not bouncing bottom, or you're not at the correct positioning. So how do you start this indicator rig?
I'd be glad to show you how, Tom.
Okay.
And you know, that is probably one of the most important things, is to adjust for the conditions that you're standing over.
Right.
And as you move up and down the stream, it changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or from day to day, your weather system changes, you get more water. I like to use a egg-shaped indicator. For me, it just floats better. It's got good aerodynamics for casting, and I like mine in line. So what I mean by that is, I'll show you as I put it on.
So you're starting with just a 9-foot 3X trout leader, right? Standard
9-foot 3X, 9 or 10 feet.
Okay.
What I find is that seems just to be the optimum length for at least Lake Erie steelhead fishing, and probably all of the Great Lakes from my experience. But anyway, I just bend the line over, and I feed it through.
Bend the leader over.
The leader, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yep.
And feed it through.
Right.
And now you got a loop sticking through there, and then you take your tag end and feed it through that loop, and just pull the whole system all the way through, and then you tighten down. Now what that allows you to do,
so that doesn't slide. It locks
if you notice,
in place.
it's locked in, and it's, when I say in line, you can see how it's proportioned all the way around. So it's not a pendulum flopping around or whatever.
Yep.
And I just find that works better, especially in the wind.
Okay.
Now, if I want to adjust that, you know, I just back it off.
Back off.
Well, I'm just pulling the line through, and then I just draw it down, and now you can see I've moved that down a foot.
Okay.
Okay. And I can move it all the way down.
You want to bring it back up? It's just
I can move it all the way down the system.
Okay.
Now, often what I do is I'll put a swivel right where the tippet material starts on your leader.
Okay.
And the reason I do that, a couple of things. In the fall of the year, when all those leaves are in the system, and you hook a leaf and the wind blows it and you get a helicopter effect, and it just twists your line. This makes it go away. The other side of it is, when you're tying in your tippet material, it's a better junction, especially if it's fluorocarbon and you have a nylon leader.
Okay, so you start with a standard nylon leader and then fluorocarbon tippet.
And fluorocarbon tippet.
Okay.
And that's what I fish.
So straight 3X off the swivel.
3X. Okay. And then I go to my fly, and I use a tandem rig.
Okay.
And I use a improved clinch to this fly.
Okay.
And so there's a system. And then
so there's an egg fly at the end of the tippet, and then below that you have what?
I have a white zonker.
Yeah. With how much tippet? Same in the same 3X.
I do the same 3X.
Okay. Because people are going to ask these
and
questions.
I do about
they want to know exactly what you got.
2.5 to 3 feet.
Okay.
Okay. And I know that's longer than what people would think it should be, but that's what I've learned. It catches fish. Everybody wants to know why. I'm not really sure why. It just catches more fish. Okay.
Good enough for me.
So on my split shot, I carry 3 different sizes, B, BB, and 3/0. And what I find is I can, on almost every system, accomplish a lot. So this is a BB right here.
Okay.
And I'll put it about 14 inches above. Then I'll add 2, 3, 4 of those, or I'll put a 3/0 on. Now, why are you doing that? And here's
how far? That's about like 8 inches from your.
That's 9 inches right there. So it's about 12 inches right there.
From
I'll
the fly.
vary it, anywhere from 10 to 14 inches. Now, probably the biggest mistake most people do is they break off. They continue to break off. And as they're doing that, let's just say you're losing both rigs, you're probably losing 2 or 3 inches every time you tie a fly.
Right.
And all of a sudden now they're down to 7 feet or 8 feet of tippet.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you can't catch fish with that, but it really impacts it. So
The more fine fluorocarbon you got in the water column, the less
right.
resistance
and that length,
against that
there's something
tippet.
about that length that just seems to be magical. So, eventually cut it back out, put a new piece of tippet material in.
Tie 2
and
flies on.
Tie
put
2
a
flies
shot
on and get back to it.
Yeah.
Your split shot is, you're measuring the variables, which are the depth, the speed of the water.
Right.
And so what you want to do is you want it to bounce, but you don't want it to drop and hang up.
Yeah.
If you're not feeling the bottom, the likelihood that you're down on the bottom where the fish normally are is not very good.
So if your strike indicator isn't twitching every once in a while, you're not deep enough.
Well, the reality is it is a bobber.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it is
but
a bobber.
we fly fishermen call it a strike indicator.
I call it a bobber.
And it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But it's very effective.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my fishing, I also will high stick with my indicator on my line. People say you can't do it, and I say, why not? Okay. So often what I'm doing, and it has to do with your distance, you understand this. When you're high sticking, it's normally off the pendulum of your rod tip, maybe a little farther out, and you're letting it come down through. But if you have to cast 30 or 40 feet across the stream, it's very hard to high stick and be accurate over there to do it. This gives you that flexibility. So I can flip it over there, if it's in a place where I can't wade into it to get there to high stick.
So you can mend and let
I
your
can
indicator.
mend it and do it, and it just gives me more flexibility.
So when do you adjust your indicator? What indications are there that I should make my indicator closer to the flies and the weight or farther away?
So this is probably the least adjustment that I will do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
But most of the time I'll go deeper. Okay. When I'm not seeing the tick of the line, and I'll pull it all the way up close to the top, within about 2 or 3 inches of the leader. But there are times when I think the water's really slow and the tail out of a pool. You cast it out. If the leader's too long, your indicator's going, but it hasn't straightened your leader out yet so that you actually see the detection. So if you shorten it down, the detection will happen quicker, and especially when they're in a tail out. That's a good place to do it.
So you're gonna probably adjust your weight before you adjust your indicator height?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the first line of defense is
The first
adding a
thing I
split
do
shot or
in
taking
steelhead
off a split
fishing
shot
is-
if you're hanging up too much.
If my length is correct, that's the first variable before I even change my flies.
Okay.
Whether you use an indicator or tight line system, you will hook the bottom and you will lose a pile of flies. No way around it.
When you have a snag like this and you're gonna have to break it off, it's a really good idea not to break it off with a high rod like this, because if it breaks off at the fly and you've got some split shot on there, the split shot can come flying back at you and hit you in the face or your fishing partner next to you. So a good idea, if you're gonna have to do that, is to put the rod underwater and then back up or pull on it. And that way, if that split shot gives way, it's not gonna go anywhere. It's not gonna come at you. Ooh.
You can manage this fishing with a 9-foot rod for a 7 or 8 weight line, especially in the smaller streams. But a better option is to go to a 10-footer. That extra foot holds line off the water, which is important regardless of whether you're fishing an indicator or using a tight line method. Steelhead returning from the ocean may or may not feed. The answer to that question is subject to endless debate. But there's no doubt that Great Lakes steelhead feed on their spawning run, as their bodies don't need to make the physiological adjustment from salt to fresh water. Steelhead eat aquatic insects, bait fish, and at the right time of year, eggs from other steelhead, and from Pacific salmon. Wherever you go, be prepared with some larger trout nymphs, egg patterns in various colors, and streamers. But most rivers have their particular favorites at different times of the season, so do your homework before a trip and visit the local tackle shop to get the latest info. And never pass up the offer of a fly from a generous angler who's more successful than you are.
Man, I forgot how cold steelhead fishing is, so just make sure that you dress warmly, dress in layers, use hand warmers, and wear gloves. Don't be like me.
Next, we'll explore a more elegant, and most of us think more fun, way to fish for Great Lakes steelhead, traditional swinging techniques. Swinging flies for Great Lakes steelhead came late to the game. Originally, on East Coast rivers, anglers tried traditional West Coast steelhead techniques with shooting heads and sinking lines. But because many of the rivers were smaller and not conducive to swinging, fishing egg and nymph patterns became the norm. But then this technique, borrowed from West Coast steelheading and European Atlantic salmon fishing, became more popular in all sizes of rivers. Modern two-handed rods and lines, plus the bigger flies with flowing motion popularized on the West Coast, became a lot more popular.
There's a fish.
Fish.
Yep.
There you go.
Swinging is considered the most fun and the most pure form of steelhead fishing. While day in and day out, it may not be the most productive way to catch steelhead, in the right situation, it can be productive, and it's far more interesting and exciting. Swinging involves getting the fly down to the level of the fish, but slightly above them, and moving the fly past the fish in an arc, not too slow and not too fast. It's a great way to cover more water than dead drifting a nymph or an egg. And the strike is more exciting because the fish often take the fly with a violent rise as it seems to be getting away from them.
You know, John's been urging me to start out short, and we got into this run. We haven't touched the steelhead all day, and I start out with a very short line, let it swing around, bang, steelhead. So always start out short and fish that water directly in front of you.
Listen to your guide.
And listen to your guide, yeah. I can manage it, I'm not that old.
You're getting there.
My legs are short, that's my only problem.
There you go. That's why I'm helping you out.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
I want to see a high rod, okay, Tom? You got a lot of big rocks.
Yep.
We don't want that leader getting around the rocks.
All right. So no side pressure till he gets in close?
No, sir.
Okay.
Good plan. Unless he comes to the surface, then you're going to roll your rod low, okay?
Mm-hmm. He or she, do we know? It looked
It's a he.
Is it? It looked like a, female to me.
I have no idea, man. He was 100 yards away from us. Okay, now you can start doing your side pressure.
All right.
It's not a big fish, but a beauty, though.
No. Oh. Yeah.
Nice. That is a nice fish.
It is.
And
yeah.
it is a he.
It's a he? Bigger than you thought, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Nice fish.
Pretty.
Fish.
Right in the corner of the mouth.
Beautiful. Look at that.
Wow.
But the anticipation of sudden pressure on a swinging fly is electric, especially after making hundreds of casts without a strike. How you set up to swing a fly depends on water flow and depth. The more you angle your cast in an across-stream manner, the quicker the fly swings, which is important in slower flows where the fly might swing too slowly. Angling the cast in a more downstream direction decreases the arc of the swing and slows its progress across the current. But it also does not allow the fly to get deep enough in some situations. Getting a fly down to the fish is important. One way is to vary the density of the heads you use.
So when you cast to the far side, there's a rock shelf over there. It's quite shallow. Normally you would bump on that, right? And then I would say hold your rod back. It'll pull the fly off of that and we drop it into the trough. But you haven't touched anything over there.
So that to me is just a good indicator that the fly's not getting down deep enough. The other thing is the angle of the line on the water. So if you have more floating line going out ahead of the boat, downstream from the boat, right, and it's staying up high for a greater length of time, that's telling me we're still not getting deep
Still
enough.
not pulling it down. So if I was here without you, I would know that I'm not getting deep enough because I wouldn't be every once in a while ticking bottom. I'd feel a little hesitation. Is that what I would do?
Those are the indicators that you would look for personally. So the first one would be, if you actually put a cast a little higher upstream, you should be ticking bottom right away, or very, as soon as your line's in there. The other one is that the length of line that you have out that's still elevated high in the water. Those are the things that you look for.
Okay, so that's what you look for, some of that floating running line going down
to get down underneath.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Sounds good. All right. So we're gonna put a sinking head on here. Go to the next. This one is This one is called This End Too Real. Is that the? No. So we're in a deeper, a little bit faster run, and John didn't feel like my fly was swinging deep enough. So we went from a head with a 3 to 5 inches per second sink rate to a 7 inch per second sink rate. So we've gone to the heaviest head that I have in my arsenal.
Let's do a quick change, Tom. Let's put a fly on there with a bit of weight to it.
Okay.
Another way to increase depth is to use a heavier fly. Sometimes going to a fly with lead eyes will get you deep enough without the bother of changing lines. It's a smart idea to have popular swinging patterns in both weighted and unweighted versions. Besides the angle of your cast, mending and how you follow the fly's progress with the rod tip can affect your swing.
Yeah, the other thing you can do is a couple of slackline mends. That'll push it down as well. So whenever the fly is under tension, the fly will ride higher. If you want to drop a fly in deeper on a longer line, we can introduce just some extra line, slackline mends, right? So you throw a couple of slackline mends into it,
right,
and then let that pull out, and the fly will go down deeper into the pool.
John's been explaining something to me that's I think a very subtle part of swinging a fly, and that's after the cast and after making a couple mends, pull back on the rod a little bit, which helps slow down the fly swing speed. John, you want to explain exactly what you're getting at here?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons that we do this. Number one, you made a cast a few minutes ago where you laid it out. The leader kind of hooked around, and what I did was, after I let it swing down to about a 45-degree angle, I said to you, just pull back on your rod a little bit. So what that does...
You mean my casting's not perfect?
It's not perfect all the time, but you're close, you're really close. But what that does, if your leader is actually hooked around in a circle like this, what you do when you pull back is you actually allow the time for the leader to turn and straighten, and then you follow it down through the pool. Okay? Yep. So you've actually repositioned the fly more into the manner that I think the fish would like to take the fly, which is kind of that straight up stream approach, right? So it looks like the fly is actually swimming upstream. Okay, so that's one. Secondly, when you make a cast, if you allow the belly of the line just to swing over like this, it's actually pulling the fly across. Right. Okay? If we throw an upstream end and you pull back the rod, you actually turn the fly again. Now the leader is hanging straight down off your rod, and you've slowed down the presentation, and as you push your rod forward, it allows the fly to go deeper in the pool, but still in that upstream facing manner. Okay? So it's very simple, they're very subtle movements, but as long as you are making that right presentation, because it's all about presentation of the fly to the fish, and as long as you continue to make that right presentation, you're covering the water effectively, it's going to produce.
Okay. Man.
Now just hold back a little. Right, now follow, and just use the current speed as the judge.
Okay.
Or you judge by the current speed as to how fast you're going to follow that fly through.
Okay.
You can be a little bit slower than the current speed. The fly will ride up a little higher on a tighter line, but it also presents the fly slower.
Two-handed rods are a lot of fun and you can cover a lot of water easier. But in some waters, you might want to use a single-handed rod. Maybe it's all you got. That's fine. I have a 10-foot 8-weight here, and it's a floating line on there. It's a Scandi line, but you can use a standard nymph line. And then you put a poly leader on the end. This one is a 10-foot, 7 inches per second sinking leader. And then you just tie a tippet on the end of there and put your fly on there, and you can fish very easily with a single-handed rod as well.
The single-handed rods are best in small streams where you don't need long casts. A 10-foot 8-weight rod is a good tool for this, although in smaller rivers where you don't need to keep as much line off the water, even a 9-footer will do.
So if you're fishing a single-handed rod, you can use a standard floating or sink tip line, floating line usually with a poly leader. You can also use a Scandi line, and then you can practice your two-handed casting. You can do these two-handed casts like a snap tee or a double spay with a single-handed rod. It's not that hard.
In big water, where it's a struggle to get your fly into position because you can't wade deep enough, or you want to cover more water in a single cast without struggling to make long casts, a two-handed rod makes longer casts and drifts much easier. These rods run from 11 to 13 feet long. The shorter, lighter rods are good for moderate rivers where you don't need really heavy sinking heads to get down. In very large rivers, a 13-foot rod or longer will make it easier to cast longer distances, and these bigger rods will support casting extremely heavy sinking heads. What kind of conditions are best for swinging? Aggressive fish willing to chase a fly are always better, which often happens with fresh fish in the fall. Water temperatures in the 50s and 60s will make cold-blooded steelhead more active. But once cold weather sets in and the fish become lethargic, it becomes more difficult to take them on a swung fly. It can still be done in cold water, but your fly must be close to the bottom and not swinging too fast, or steelhead won't bother to chase it.
So all you're doing is providing the fly to the fish in a really good presentation. You're allowing the fly to come down through the river, and you're hoping that you're creating an opportunity for a fish to take it. That's it. That's what it's all about, right? And if you make it anything more than that, you're adding difficulty to it. So it's very simple, and it's so on. And then the other thing that we're dealing with is we've just had a crazy water temperature drop here. So we've just dropped about 4 to 5 degrees. Fish are cold-blooded. Their metabolism slows them down, and also the requirement for food goes away as their metabolism drops. So with that upstream men holding back the rod, it's a slower presentation, and it allows them more time to actually see and grab the fly. And as long as your fly patterns are something that's attractive to them, you're hoping that they're going to grab them and eat them, just like you just accomplished. So mission accomplished. Way to go, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Well done.
It was fun. It was great. Any day you catch a steelhead is a great day.
Again, in the spring when waters warm up and fish are dropping back into the lake after spawning, a swung fly can be very effective. What kinds of water types are best? More uniform flows make it easier to get a good swing, so look for long sweeping runs, riffles, and tailouts. Broken pocket water and water with many swirly currents make it difficult to catch steelhead on a swung fly, although it can work there if you plan your strategy so the fly swings properly in just the right little pocket. Listen as John Valk explains why he had me fish various places on a day of swinging for steelhead.
John, why do you think there are fish in this pool?
Okay, so what this is, you've got a very nice run here, and if you look downstream, you can see the faster water. It's quite shallow. Those fish are they're migratory, obviously. So they're gonna migrate up through this, into this part of the river, and then they'll slowly move up through this run to the head of the pool, which again picks up fast, shallow water. So when they get there, especially if it's a bright day, they'll turn back and come back into this pool and hold here. So this is a run, but it's a holding area, you know.
And it's a holding area because it's got deeper water.
Deeper water, a deep trough.
And some rocks.
Exactly. So you have structure in this pool that's gonna hold fish. You have the deep trough down the center, and you have a nice even current speed, right? This is that really nice soft, they refer to it as walking speed current that makes swinging a fly so easy to do, right? So that way you get a nice presentation of the fish, and then hopefully you're gonna light one up here in about 2 seconds, and it gives us a nice big pool to fight them in.
So John, why we're fishing just a little bucket here?
Right.
Why are the fish in this spot? I mean, it's a big pool. The current looks about the same. It's a little bit slower over there, a little bit faster here. But why are the fish right here on this side?
So first of all, fish like to swim.
Yeah.
And they like to be in water. So that's why they're here.
Okay. Oh, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, if you look downstream, you've got this big, long, flat piece of water with a nice even current in it.
Right.
And what happens is on the bottom of the river, there's actually a depression or a just kind of like a channel. It's a deeper trough that comes up through. And it's the shape of the trough. So way down there, it's gonna start almost dead center of the river, and then it comes up the middle over here, and then it actually kind of comes off to this side, and right here we have a depression in the bottom of the river. So that depression might only be a foot or 2 feet, Tom, but it's enough to hold a fish as they're migrating up the river. They can hold here for just a little while. You know, might be a few minutes, it could be a day or two. But quite often I get to these little depressions, we run a few casts through it, and guess what? There's another one there.
So John, why did we stop here? We've got a big long pool. I mean, it's what, 200 yards long, and it all looks fairly uniform. Why did we stop in this particular place?
So just like the other pool that we went to, there's a little depression in the bottom. We have basically the same idea here. The depression in the bottom is a little bit larger, but we've got some really big boulders. Yeah. And if you look just downstream, Tom, just downstream of the boat, like 15, 20 feet, you'll see some swirls in the water. That's the current, the hydraulics being kicked up off the boulders.
Okay.
The fish will be sitting in those boulders.
Okay.
And then they'll bust up into the next run.
Okay.
Okay.
So if I was here by myself, would I be able to find this water? Not knowing what you know, would I be able to?
An experienced steelhead angler, once you've put the time in, absolutely.
And so they'd look for that kind of walking speed.
Exactly.
They'd look for some boils on the surface to indicate there's some roughness on the bottom.
Yep, exactly. So you have that, and there's a couple of other givens that you'll always have when it's a brighter day. It's not so bright today, but the water where you have the depth will always be a little bit darker.
Darker, yeah.
So you're looking for that darker water.
Okay.
You're looking for anything that could give you a sign of an obstruction on the bottom.
Right.
Or any kind of structure where a fish will hold.
Okay.
Okay.
Swinging flies come in many types, but the most important aspect of a swinging fly is that it has mobility in the water, so that it looks like something alive trying to get away. Flies can be as small as 1 inch long or as long as 4 inches long, and in every shade from black to white and every bright color in between. In general, use smaller flies in clear and shallow water and bigger flies in fast, deep, or discolored water.
So we got that fish by changing flies, right? We were using black.
Red and black.
Red and black, and we went to black and purple, and they were both the same weight.
Yeah, exactly.
The same weight. We did drop down a little bit, so we were fishing a little bit different water, but so you never know, right? You never know. There's so many variables. But it looks like the purple and black, and it's a beautiful, sparse, but weighted fly that gets down nicely without having a lot of stuff to retard its sink rate. Just gets right down with those lead eyes, and
So what I do, Tom, is I have a series of patterns, and they're almost all identical, just different colors. They're only tied with marabou.
Just marabou,
so
and a little flash.
Yeah, and you hold that in the water, that stuff flutters.
Yeah.
There's a lot of movement to the fly. And what we did was we moved down through this pool systematically. I just finished telling you that there's a rock ridge out there, and I said, I want you to run that fly right on that ridge. You made the perfect cast, you put it right on the ridge. I said, you're right on it, boom, you hit the fish.
Yeah.
If you decide to chase steelhead with a two-handed rod, you really only need 2 casts to get the job done. Let's get a lesson from Pete Kutzer on those 2 casts and also an easy way to shoot line with a 2-handed rod.
Hi, I'm Pete Kutzer with the Orvis Fly Fishing Schools. Today, I want to talk to you about casting 2-handed rods and a couple casts that are going to get you fishing off of both sides of the river very effectively. Those 2 casts are the snap tee and the double spay. The snap tee and the double spay will get you fishing in just about any river where you can swing a fly. The snap tee, we're going to start with our rod tip downstream, and a lot of times you're set up with your rod across your body. Whenever you make any spay cast or 2-handed cast, we want to be aware of wind. If I have wind coming downstream and I set up to cast off of my shoulder right here, I'm a right-handed caster, with this wind coming in this direction, I risk the chance of hooking myself in the back of the neck. So I'd want to set up my cast downstream, and we can do that with either of these casts. But let's take a look at this snap tee first. With this snap tee, I'm going to start with my rod tip low, downstream. I'm going to take my rod and I'm going to move it in a circle and come back to where I finish. Right here, here's a big clockwise circle. Now I'm back where I finished. By doing that, that's going to take our line and set it up upstream, where we can get that good anchor point and set up to deliver that fly. After we make that snap, we're then going to sweep our rod around, climbing, getting it into our good forward cast position. Once we're here, now we can deliver our fly. Again, I start with my rod tip downstream. My rod's kind of across my body, or my arm's going over my body. Here's that circle, right back to where I started. Now I can begin that sweep, climbing, climbing, climbing. Now I can deliver that fly out to my target. Take your time with a lot of these casts. It's going to be nice and slow. That's kind of the spay casting mantra. Keep everything slow, keep it easy. But if you practice this cast, I'm sure it's going to help you catch a lot more fish. The double spay is a really fun cast to use. And in this situation, I'm set up perfectly. A lot of times when you're set up for that double spay, your rod is going to be downstream away from your body. We're going to take our bottom hand, grab the bottom part of this grip right here. We don't want to grab the whole rod like this. Just a nice gentle grab right around the bottom of the grip. My top hand, I'm going to hold the rod very, very gently. And you'll notice when I make a lot of these casts, I keep my grip very, very light, very loose, and very relaxed. And that's the key to good casting. We're going to start with a nice, easy flop. I'm going to take my rod, lift it up, and I'm going to cross my arms right here. Notice my rod tip came down. What that did was that pulled the tip of my line, my poly leader here or tip, or even just a regular leader if you were using a single-handed rod, it pulls it a lot closer to you. That's going to help set you up for that nice sweep, bringing the rod around, where then you can make that delivery out to your target. A common mistake I see is getting a little too aggressive with that flop. If I get a little too aggressive, that throws my line upstream, and now when I sweep this rod around to make this cast, now that line's around my body, I could potentially tangle myself. So when we make that initial flop, nice and easy. Nice and easy, we're just pulling this line a little bit closer, trying to get it in this good anchor position. I'm gonna make this nice easy flop, and now I'm gonna sweep my rod around. When I sweep my rod around, I'm just turning my hands. It's almost like you're spinning a steering wheel right here. I'm sweeping that rod around, but then I have to climb this rod up to get into that good casting position. Let's take a look at a double spay in real time. Nice easy flop. Sweep the rod around, climbing. Now I can make that delivery right out to my target. That's the double spay, and it's a great cast to get you fishing in a lot of different positions. A lot of people ask me, how do I manage my running line when using a two-handed rod? There's a lot of different ways out there. I find this way to be pretty simple. What I like to do is I like to cut that length of running line in half and hold it underneath my pinky of my bottom hands. Right now I have 10 strips of fly line out, so I'm going to cut it in half. So there's going to be 5 strips that I'm going to hold here, and then 5 strips that I'm going to let sit loose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's half of this running line now touching the water. I grab that line with my pinky, and now I can strip again, holding on to this line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I have my running line in my head right outside the tip of the rod where I need it to make that long cast. Now I take this running line and I'm going to rest it over the bridge of the reel and then hold it with my bottom hand. The weight of that head is going to keep a little tension on this running line, keeping it rested up against the bridge of the reel, and now I can make this nice cast. By doing this, I have a lot less line in contact with the water, so it's going to be able to shoot a little bit easier. When I go to make this cast, I can set my cast up, make that delivery, and that line fires out pretty nicely, pretty quickly, and pretty effortlessly. If I strip all this line in, and hold that line right there on the water, and then wrap the line underneath the reel, and I go to make this cast, even with a good cast, that line came off very, very slowly. There was a lot of tension with that water holding onto that line. Give this a shot, and I'm sure it'll help you shoot a little more line. Just cut that length in half. You can do it with 3 strips and 3 strips, 6 and 6, 7 and 7. I've even used 10 strips and 10 strips. That's a lot of running line to manage, but I think it's a pretty easy way to do it.
There's one final piece of advice I can give you when swinging flies for steelhead. Don't set the hook like you would on a trout, dry fly, or nymph. If you do, you'll just pull the fly away from the fish.
Lousy cast that was.
It's all right, Tom. You can get fish on lousy casts. They don't all have to be pretty.
Wait until you feel the weight of the fish, then just tighten up, hang on, and enjoy the ride.
There's a fish.
Fish?
Yep.
There you go.
Ooh!
Coming at
or is he coming at
you.
He's there. He's still there.
Nice. Way to go, Tom.
Yeah.
Nice steelhead, buddy. Nice fish.
Beautiful.
Lower your rod a little when he comes to the surface, okay?
Okay.
Only when he comes to the surface. If he's taking off, you can raise your rod.
Yeah.
But as they come up to the top of the water, I'd like you to roll a little to the side.
Okay.
A high rod when they're taking off is great because of boulders of rocks. Keeps your line up out of it. Play them a little lighter, Tom.
All right, all right.
I'm going to back the boat over towards the bank here so I can get out and net this fish for you.
Yeah, I want to get out too. I'm not, I tend to be heavy-handed.
Yeah, don't be heavy-handed.
All right.
Right? We really want to show off the fish of this river.
Okay. Love that pull after all those casts.
What'd you make, 20 casts?
No, made more than that, man. Made more than 20 casts.
Easy, lighten up on them.
Jeez. We got 16 pound out there, man. Is that gonna get off? Are you worried about the hook pulling
I'm worried
out?
about the hook pulling
Oh,
out.
okay.
So,
right.
you know, especially if they're hitting a little bit light and
Yeah.
not look like a light take.
Yeah.
So we call those skin hooks,
Uh-huh.
right? Where you don't get them in the mandible, you actually get them in the front of the mouth.
Yeah.
And that hook can pull out, right?
Okay.
So,
Whoop. Hey!
beautiful
Wow.
buck, Tommy.
Wow. Thank
Awesome,
you,
man. Way to
John.
go.
Thank you.
Way to go. When you set the hook on that fish, that was one of the best hook sets I've ever seen.
Well, I didn't set the hook. That's the thing.
Exactly. I get a lot of guys who try to rip the fly back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the best thing to do when you're swinging flies, especially when you're dealing with sink tips, you feel the weight of the fish, lift the rod slow. That's it.
Yeah.
Whether you call them steelhead or lake run rainbows is irrelevant. These big forms of rainbow trout are some of the most exciting fish on the planet. They don't always come easy, but they're always worth the effort.
The Orvis Guide to Fly Fishing is supported by Orvis Fly Fishing, Adipose Boat Works, Global Rescue, Trout Unlimited, Oscar Blues Brewery.